Hello and welcome to the Death Chicks. I'm Misty Lynn and I'm here with co-host Patty Burgess. And today's show we're going to be talking with each other to give our audience an opportunity to learn more about who we are, why we started this journey, and the bigger picture of what the Death Chicks is about. So without further ado, I'm looking forward to diving right in. I'm especially excited about this show because it allows Patty and I just to kind of do what we do. And in all of our preparations for this show, and we've had a lot of talks, we've been talking about this since the fall time, last fall, and we have a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to getting into that comfy zone with Patty, and hopefully you can get a taste of who we are a little bit behind the scenes. And as I noted in the comments for this show, this was something that Patty wanted to do from the get-go, just to kind of, before we start doing our thing, we should tell people who we are and what our thing is. And I was too shy to do that. I was, I'm not used to being behind the camera or to talking live, so I was thinking, well, I just want to do some shows and get my feet wet, and then we can do this show. So here we are now. My toes are a little bit wet, maybe my feet, and we're doing it. So take it away, Patty.
All right. So I am one half of the Death Chicks, and Misty, you're right. We've been talking about this for what seems like a really long time, and most of what we've really been learning about really is the tech part of the Google Hangout platform, which has been terrific. It's been maddening. It's been scary. But the really great part about how Misty and I came together is that when you find somebody that is in the death space, I guess you could say, you feel like you've found your tribe or your kindred spirit. And we could talk about death, dying, grief, loss, all things around that, without a lot of warm-up. And I think that's part of what this show is really designed to do, is to do a couple things: start the conversation, bring people into the fold about talking about this, just like we talk about everyday things, because frankly, death is an everyday occurrence. And it runs the gamut of emotions, from certainly sad, and an event, especially if it's tragic or if it's sudden. But within that, there's so much richness, and there's so much to talk about, and there's so much to explore. And I think it's probably one of the reasons we came together to do this Death Chicks show is because both Misty and I feel like death is a very natural and normal process, which is part of life. And just like we give birth, all of this stage, I guess you could say. There's joy. There's all sorts of things going along around the topic of birth. We kind of want to give that same stage and that same platform to death as well, because there's lots to talk about. So that's kind of a little bit about, why we're here. We want to talk. We want to talk a little bit more frankly, a little bit more openly, and take a deep dive, as you would say, Misty, into all things death, dying, grief, and loss. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end. What we really feel like death can mean and what it can do for us in life. And in the meantime, we just wanted to have you know a little bit more about us, how we got here, why we're doing this, and probably what we talked about doing is just really kind of each of us to you, so that you could get to know us a little bit better, spend some time with us. So with that, yeah, go ahead.
I have to say I really like how you touched on the whole birth and death thing, and it's come up for me lots since I've started this exploration into death, and I have the same sense, like we come into this life, and it's always so exciting. I had my first child later in life, and it was such an amazing experience to be pregnant and to bring that life into the world and to nurture that life. when I started exploring the death scene, it really hit me like we give so much celebration and feeling and energy into bringing life into this world. But on the other end, when we exit this world, which is just as an amazing thing and a time for celebration and big feelings and love and retrospection and all that stuff, which is about honoring life, it's like there's that imbalance there. We do it at the beginning, and at the end, we seem to freeze up a little bit and become afraid. And for me, that when I saw it, kind of reframed it. I was like, wow, and I really agree with you that it's my wish and hope for the world that we can begin to see the end as just as delightful and wonderful and honored and cherished and loved and celebrated as we did the beginning.
Well, it's funny you say that. What is that saying where they say when someone is born, the heavens are crying and, the people here on earth are rejoicing, and when someone dies, the people here are crying and the heavens are rejoicing. It's like this really very cool cyclical experience, and, we don't really know what's on the other side, although some of us in the end-of-life industry have seen some really interesting things that might point to some beliefs or experiences. But here we are in this cycle, and what I find is so fascinating is that this is the thing that informs our life the most, is our death, because as we talked about earlier before we were in this show, it's death gives sort of like an urgency, not a frenzy to life, but an urgency to life, because if we're all here for some reason, if we're all here to put out our art, so to speak, not a lot of reasons. Death comes when it comes, and I think it informs what we can do in life. So it's more than just talking about the dying process, signs and symptoms, or all kinds of things around death itself. It's what does death infuse into life, and what can it teach us at the same time. So those are the kinds of things I'm excited about. No, go right ahead.
It's interesting. Well, the signs and the symptoms, because I think in our world, and what I've seen a lot, is the medicalization of death. And it's almost like the whole feeling part, end of life, is so taboo and not talked about and just not a generally accepted thing in our world, that the only way we can frame it is to medicalize it. And when you medicalize something, it really puts a wall up to the feeling part of things. And for many people, that's totally safe. And it's easy to talk about medicine and drugs and how to, because then we don't have to really deal with and face that we're losing someone we love, or that it may be ourselves, or all the gamut of feelings. But I find that's an interesting phenomenon that I think people can hide behind, and I guess part of what brought me to this table and this game is to really challenge that and to challenge people to start looking at this, and it was a huge challenge for me, right? When I made the decision that this is what I was going to do, it was really tough. It was really tough. And I remember I was talking to her. Go ahead.
I know there's a delay between here and the Arctic, I'm sure, but I'm sorry about that. But you mentioned about when you made the decision. I know. Tell us a little bit about how that happened. You throughout the other shows, you kind of dotted it through about your mom, but I'd like to kind of hear that in total, if we could, about how you got started in this and made that decision.
Yeah. Well, it was really, when my mom passed, that's when I had this big aha moment and saw the huge gap just between how we talk about death. So how people talk about and interact, I guess, with death, compared to the inner game that was going on in my experience of it. So my experience of it compared to the conversations around it with people that were involved. It was a huge death. And then for a long time I've been asking myself as a coach, focusing on women's empowerment, how do I best serve? Like what do people need in the world, and what's not being done? And I get bored easily. I haven't had the same job for over 2 years, so I'm always looking for change, and I need like fresh stuff to keep me going. And when I thought about, addressing death, I was like, wow, it's pretty scary. But one of the reasons I think I decided to was that I knew that it would always be fresh, simply because no one's really doing it. And I have to say now that I'm in the game, and I've really been connecting with other people in the field, and that's how we connected, Patty, was that I've realized there's a lot of people doing it, and that's exciting. But I still feel that it's such an unexplored area that I could spend my whole life exploring it, and I'm so looking forward. And Patty, we've totally talked about this when we're like 90, sitting on our rockers, drinking our little hot water. We'll be looking back at these first shows, and also I totally believe we're going to be looking at the world, and I believe in 40 years this is going to change. Like I really feel that the work we're doing and the wonderful work everyone else in this field is doing is creating a major shift, and this is going to have a big impact. That's part of my story.
Yeah, I wonder if it's like the chicken and the egg. Are people interested in this, and they just haven't found their place among the dead, so to speak? I mean, is that how they, are they thinking about this? Because I'm seeing an uptick and an upswing in the kinds of people that are coming out to talk about this. We've got, it's interesting because my background is in the hospice end-of-life industry, and at that time when I was a community educator and talking with many doctors, physicians, when I say back then, this is only several years ago to about 10 years ago when I was actually actively working in the hospice industry. Lots of doctors certainly weren't talking about it. Lots of doctors weren't having conversations with their patients. And now we see the most recent, is it Atul Gawande has come out with that beautiful book. He's a doctor and talking about how we really don't do death well here, at least in the U.S. or probably Canada as well, and how we can do it better and how doctors can be a part of it, and how woefully unprepared so many professionals. Now, these are the people that we rely on to have these conversations and to give us resources and all that kind of thing. And basically, it's kind of like they're looking away as well. It's a tough conversation. So more training, all of that kinds of thing needs to come to be, and that's sort of how I got interested in doing this death thing, I guess you could say. This death thing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and what's interesting too is how I met Patty. I decided to do the death thing. I was all in. If I'm going to do it, I don't tiptoe around things. I'm all in. And what my vision was that to help people accept this better was to create the go-to website for all things death and dying. So I was busy connecting with people and working to get some people in on this. And then I connected with Patty. And I remember I was so excited because I'd seen her website, and I really was impressed with what she was doing. And Patty's title is the President of Possibilities, and I love possibilities. And if it's normal or been done, it doesn't interest me as much. But if it's new, that's where I like to be. So I was doing a little dance, really, Patty. The day before our talk, I was like, I'm talking with the President of Possibilities tomorrow. I was totally stoked. That was when I was in Nova Scotia and at the farmhouse there, and that's where our conversation started. And I don't know how it got us here, but it sure did, and I'm really happy about that.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask you, I know some of your story, but I don't know it all. So what got you into this game? Was there? I know you talk about there's people who are in this death game. Kind of funny to call it a game, but let's keep it light. We're about keeping it light, playful. So you often say that there's usually a pivotal point in your life that brings you here. I don't know, what is it you say? It's not like you wake up and think, oh yeah, I'm going to go to the field of death. So
that's so true. It's funny because people say usually, if they ask what you do, there's usually one of a couple of reactions. It's either like, oh my God, I could never do that. Isn't that depressing? Or that must be so sad. Or it might be, wow, that is awesome. And whether or not they personally would be interested. So it is interesting to get people's reactions. But usually, as I say, nobody wakes up one day and says, oh, I think I'll try and work in the death industry and see what that's all about. Nobody usually says that. People don't come here as a result of even just experience. Let's say they're a nurse and then they end up a hospice nurse. Very rarely does somebody end up in the hospice business or end-of-life business because they want to check it out. Usually, as you said, some pivotal experience. And for me, that pivotal experience was about 15 years ago now. It's hard to even believe that I was working in a completely different industry, although my background is in healthcare. And I met a dear friend. She ended up becoming a dear friend when I was living in Atlanta. And she worked with my company. And this was really the beginning of it because she was supposed to come down to the lower level for a meeting, and she didn't show up. I went back up to find her, and her name was Rona, and it's interesting because I'm in Philly now, and she was originally from Philadelphia, so we were two Philly girls in Atlanta kind of bonding on that, and got to know her well. So one day when I went up, she was on the phone and she was crying, and I said, what's going on? And she said, well, I'm on the phone to the doctor's office, and they're telling me it's bad news, but they won't tell me what it is. And so at that moment, I said, that's it. Just tell them you're on your way. We packed up, and we went. Now, she was basically, for the last month or so, she was saying she had this little cough and a little pain in her back. Now, this you have to understand, too. My friend Rona was like a fitness babe body. She was always out walking, exercising, aerobics, weights, you name the whole thing. Me, on the other hand, I was sort of like more like your evolving couch potato. So we went there, and we went to the pulmonologist who had the results. And at that meeting, so I was with her every day from diagnosis to death pretty much, which was about a year. She was diagnosed with end-stage cancer, end-stage lung cancer. She had not been a smoker. She had not been, I guess that we didn't know at the time, but the kind that Dana Reeves, if you remember Dana Reeves, she died from that. So it was devastating. I remember on the ride home thinking, how come the cancer's over there instead of here when this was a woman who was very fit and really seemed to take care of things. She also was 45 years old. She had 3 young boys, ages 13, 11, and 9. And most recently, I reconnected to her youngest, who's now 26, and a medical student who was probably going to work in end-of-life care. So it was that was a really cool circle. But anyway, I spent with her from that day forward, again, pretty much every day, and there was this roller coaster ride of emotions, and many people were there to support her. I was one of them, and this is kind of a long way of getting around to your answer. How did I get the title of President of Possibility? It was actually given to me by Rona, but we were all supporting her, and we were all supporting her in different ways. And it was then that she introduced me to hospice, and it was hospice that got her ready to be able to do the kinds of things she would not have been able to do on her own. Like she made it to her oldest boy's bar mitzvah with the help of hospice. So I got introduced to these people in this, what I thought at the time was a place because she went there, but it was really a philosophy and a movement that I couldn't believe that there would be this whole industry set up around to help people at the end of life. So that's how I got started. But during that time, she used to call me the director of possibility, because we were talking about potential cures. We were talking about trips to the other side, what that would look like. These were all the kinds of things that nobody else in her circle wanted to talk about. Just really diving deep, as you say, into what does this mean, and kind of trying death on, because we knew that this is where it was going to end. We just didn't know when. She told me that I was her director of possibility, and before she died, I asked her if I could have a promotion to president of possibility. So she gave it to me. I don't know if it was willingly or not, but it was like a better alliteration. And so that was 15 years ago. I had no idea I would be doing this. I thought someday I'm going to use that title, and here I am, president of possibility. And all things are possible. Let me tell you, I've seen a lot. So
I was muted there. That was really a great story. Yeah. And I think I remember you saying too, and I love the stories about the other side, because when I grew up, I was raised in a Christian background, which is very typical, I think, for people of my age. And I remember I was in grade 4, and I had the 4 or 5, or maybe later, but I had a best friend, and she was awesome. We were like this. Oh, there are 2 fingers. And she was, her mother was Japanese, and her father was Caucasian. And she was, in my view, I was kind of the wild one, and she was more just the straight. We both always did good in school, but one day, talking about whatever, it came up that she believed in reincarnation. And this really floored me at the time, and so much so that I still remember it today. I remember just being like, wow, like that idea to me was so far from my realm of knowing, and I just thought it was some wild, like I was just blown away that my best friend believed in this. It really, really hit me. And then skip ahead, I don't know, 40 or 35 years, and at my mother's celebration of life, we came back to the house, and me and my sister and her family and my family and my mom's family, so a number, almost all of her sisters made it, and here we are celebrating, really celebrating, telling stories and remembering, and we're having a good time. And it was funny because my sister takes in exchange students, so they live with them, and the one that was with them at this time was from Germany. And she asked my sister told me this, she said, "Why isn't anyone sad?" and my auntie Ruth, she said, "Well, that's just how we roll around here. This is how we do things. We bring humor to it, we bring lightness, and we tell stories, and we remember." But one of the things that my Aunt Ruthie said was that she said, and she's maybe about 55 now, taking this, but she said, "Well, maybe I'll fix that one next time round." And it just rolled off her tongue like nothing, and that floored me, because I thought, in that period of time, my aunt, made this big shift, and I had also been making my shift to kind of my own exploration of what is death and life and after death, but for me that was huge, and I love exploring that too, and all the people I've talked to in this field, or who've had near-death experiences, or who've been diagnosed, or who've been proclaimed dead and came back, those experiences I find are amazing. And the more I read and talk to people about them, the more there's a similarity to them. So it's almost like we can't deny it anymore. And so that's another part that I'm drawn to, and exploring that and taking the fear away, because how I was brought up, there's a certain fear around death that if you do bad things in life, when you pass over, there's consequences. And I grew up believing that, and that would certainly give fear to anyone, because as humans, we all make mistakes. It's part of life, and I believe it's part of our learning and how we learn. And from what I've heard with people, conversations about those experiences, that's my little dog, is that it's just not true. You know, that it's just love when you do pass over. It's love and light, and to me, I think that's important for others to hear that and to hear the stories.
Absolutely, and I hope that that's what we can do as Death Chicks, Myste, is to bring people on with varying ideas, beliefs, experiences. I too am really fascinated by. I mean, I don't think you can be in the death business and not want to take a peek into what happens when we die on the other side, and that seems to be, you know, the big question. And sadly, isn't it interesting how nobody knows, but most of us pick fear. If there's fear and love, and you have a choice, why is it that we would pick fear? Well, to me, that may be, you know, upbringing, culture, you know, personal beliefs. It may be a number of things, and that's why I really do like speaking with people. You're probably familiar with Anita Morjani, who has written a book, Dying to Be Me. What I love about that book and her story and her experience as someone who died and came back is that she was multicultural and multi-religious. So it wasn't any one particular path that informed her experience, which I thought was great because that seemed a little bit more universal. And then we're seeing, I think, just the beauty of the conversation. You know, it's kind of like if we have it, there's other people that are having it elsewhere. Speaking to what you were just saying, Eben Alexander's another one who wrote, I forget what the name of his book is, but he was a neurosurgeon that ended up having this, dying from spinal meningitis, and as he explains the physiology of what happens, it feels pretty undeniable, and he's a credible person, not to say anybody else isn't, but, you know, in terms of the way culture sees credibility, there's a lot there to really explore. So I think one of the reasons I'm personally drawn to this as well is because maybe I want to really kind of solidify my beliefs about death and the afterlife in terms of love and not fear. So I think the more I explore, the more it opens up the pathways for that love and acceptance and understanding. So that's kind of, you know, just sort of occurred to me as we're talking about it, that there's something else that draws me here, and maybe that's to get more of the love stuff on the other side. That's my goal.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's fun to open these doors that sometimes the unknown, for some reason, many people fear the unknown.
Well, I hope that we can help open those doors for people who, you know, might be interested but not comfortable to. Maybe we can do that as Death Chicks as well.
I think the that area of discomfort is where I really like to work with people, and that's where I kind of do my genius work. And I kind of did a download of all that I know, and the first name for this course that I created was Facing Fear When Death is Near. And I really think that well, when you talked about the love and fear thing, I think it's really key, huge part of our life. And I just recently made the connection with, you know, all the old cartoons and stuff. And you know, there's a little angel, there's a little devil on this side. And that just came home for me the other day, because when I frame things in life, I heard someone say, and I'm like, yeah, I totally believe that we can, whenever we're doing anything, we can be coming at it from a place of love or from a place of fear, or maybe call that faith or fear. But when I thought about that, and when I looked at my life and how I move through life and what's going on, there's always a little kind of thing going on in your head, the chatter, and we're doing a lot with the quantum physics, and I love that part. That part really gets me excited about life and everything and all things, and it explains death really too. That when we shift out of fear and back into faith and love, incredible things happen. And for me, a lot of it in my own personal growth and in working with others is just to do that slight reframing, so that slight shift. So if people are worried or stuck or whatever they're experiencing, if we do the deep dive and really get into what's going on and just shift them a little bit one way, the world can change. The world can change. And I've had that experience with the idea of death and with the idea of what happens after death. And to me, that's that shifting and the opening up and the tapping into human potential. And I think that once, as a culture, we do that, we go there, and we accept death, I see our potential as humans to kind of be like the ever-blooming lotus flower, and I think that death acceptance is like the super fertilizer on the blooming lotus flower of life. So there's a fun little new metaphor I just created. The places we will go, Patty.
I know the places we will go. You see, the audio, at least on my side, is just a little bit light, and so I just wanted to mention that to you. I also, the death acceptance. There is kind of a movement that's happening, and you mentioned those words, death acceptance, and I think we're a part of that, which is getting people to accept the inevitable in a way that has meaning, that can create connection, that can offer sometimes healing when there's unfinished business. And I think I love those words that you used, was death acceptance. I wanted to also just call your attention to Mark. He corrected himself a little. Mark Davenport says, beyond how we handle the death of others, I'm fascinated by the possibilities of what may happen to each of us when we die, whatever dying may be. He was very cute. In the next little post, he writes dying, to make sure we know that he knows that you don't spell it that way. But, you know, it's not just us. It's others that are fascinated by this too, and it's nice to know that you're not going there singularly. You know what I mean? That you've got some, people, we have each other's back, so to speak. But, you know, Myste, I wanted to ask you a question that you started when you were talking about when you first started this. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your coaching, because you had mentioned that as a coach, you often sometimes see people who are grieving. And I just wondered if, when you see people who are grieving as a coach, do you start to see other areas of their life where things are stuck? Can you say a little bit about that, or if that's been your experience?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because my experience has shown me that when people, so when I work with widows, when I work with people who've lost someone who's very close to them, it's like their life was in 3D and now it's flat, and the whole life as they know it is just it's gone, right? Like they're in this zone unknown, and they don't really know what to do with themselves. And as we do the work that I do, which is visualization a lot, and I'm able to bring people to this place, their inner place of peace, and I can achieve this usually rather quickly with people. And I can't really explain it, it's just a gift I have, I guess. And when they get there, it's almost like all their worries or fears or anything is gone, because it's like they're connecting with their, I call it the inner divine. And it's that spark of life that we all have, that we sometimes can forget about when we're just you know, struggling along with life. So what I see, and this is my perspective, right? I see death and major loss as a major opportunity because it gives you a chance to really look at your life and yourself and your values, and you really get to connect with yourself in a way that you would never have the opportunity to if life were to keep going as it was going. And not to say that one is better than the other, and not to in any way say that your loss wasn't great, but I can see the opportunity in this, and that's why my brand is Bittersweet Blessing. But what I find is that when I work with women who are grieving, we get led to different areas. So one client I worked with, she was looking through, we'd had about 4 calls together, so we knew each other pretty good. And she was looking through her picture book. And for some reason, this picture of a grade 3 teacher stuck out for her. And we started talking about this, and then I led her on a journey, a healing journey, visualization to do some healing work around this teacher, because this teacher was really, I guess she was really mean, and she affected my client in some pretty big ways. So, and we went really deep with this. Like I took her places that I thought I might have been stretching her too far, but when we came out on the other end, she was just amazed at how much lighter she was, and at how much this woman's influence had been affecting her life. And I think it was pretty much on a subconscious level. And the cool thing was that at the end of this work, she looked at the picture and she said, "Myste, I can't believe it." She said, "The teacher is looking at me." She said, "I have looked at this picture so many times in my life, and I've just seen the negative, the fear, the hate, all the bad stuff. And this is the first time she looked at it." So she really had done a shift, and she was looking at it with new eyes. She's looking at me. And my sense, and I said, I don't know where this is coming from, but my sense is that some pretty major healing went on. And maybe this was like even from long ago, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to explain things like that. This is just kind of what came to me, and it was really neat. So yes, when you say, do other things come up with people who are grieving? Yes, and I think that's why it's an opportunity, why it's a blessing, and how we can use great loss and death to look at ourselves and to reevaluate our life.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful tool, and it sounds like, you know, with your coaching, if you have a client who goes in one state and comes out in another, to me that is a healing, and it was probably only by looking at it versus pushing it away, because I really think, you know, people say sometimes, I don't want to go back and look at the rest of this stuff because it's too painful. Well, I feel like, well, you don't have to go back because it's already here and it's running the show, you know, so we might as well look at it and maybe reframe it, as to use your words, reframe it and see how maybe there's a lesson or something that it has to teach us that we hadn't looked at before. And I think sometimes that's only possible with another person like you as a coach, as an escort. I think if we could do it on our own, we would do it on our own, right? But many of us can't seem to do that. So it's wonderful. And you don't really put yourself out there as a grief coach, do you? But it sounds like you get to that.
Yeah. And it's, a lot of people, it's hard to reach out and say, yeah, I want some help, I want someone to hold my hand through this, but it's, you know, the results can be amazing, and I'm learning this too, because like I've had people help me a lot along the way. I've had my own personal challenges I've overcome, and I've overcome them, and then new ones come, and I've overcome them, and if someone were to take a video of my life, it'd be pretty amazing. But thank you for, it's always fun. I love talking about what I do. I don't do it very often, but Patty, I'm curious, because I know you work in hospice, and I know you teach people how to be with people who are dying. I think that's what you do, but I'd love to hear, like, what do you do, Patty, and what do you do?
What the heck do you do over there?
Hospice is a new word for me.
What's that? I missed
Hospice
it.
is a pretty new. It's a hospice. The whole word and the concept. It's relatively new for me, and I really like how you explained it at the beginning. And I'd like you to flush that out a bit, and maybe some of our viewers are in a position where they're living or caring for someone who's preparing to pass, and I think what you do or hospice workers do is so important to have a loved one there beside you when you're getting ready to go, someone who gets it and who can help you let go and move on in a way that's peaceful. I think that just as we have, well, there is death doulas now. There's midwives and people who help bring life into the world, and now we're finally starting to see people who escort life out of the world, and I think that's part of your area of expertise. So I'd love to hear more about it.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, it was my friend Rona who really introduced me to this whole hospice thing, and I was so enamored. Where a lot of my friends were kind of turning away, I found myself wanting to find out more, and the best way I thought to do that was to work with a hospice. I was in a completely different healthcare business at the time, but this had taken up so much of my life over the year before that I thought, this is really something that is speaking to me, and I should follow this call and see where it leads. So what I first did was, after the death of my friend, actually it was probably more like a year or so later, I found an organization where I could train to be a volunteer, and I became a hospice volunteer. And I had a wonderful experience with that training. It was very experiential. And when many volunteers show up, I think to do hospice training, they do bring with them the energy of an experience. It could have been an amazing death, a good death, which we would call, and that's a goal, I think, for everybody. And they want to be able to kind of perpetuate that in the world. It also could have been that it was a less than stellar death, and they know it can be different, and that's why they want to do it. So that's kind of where I came from. I was so enamored of this whole possibility, this experience of death and dying that just felt so sacred. It really, really did. So I became a volunteer, and then I became a volunteer trainer. And then I decided, at that point I was just doing the volunteer, and I thought I wanted to know more, even above and beyond that. So I started working for a hospice at the time in Atlanta and became what they call a community educator. And really what a community educator does, the formal idea is to go out and educate the community as to what hospice is, how we can improve end of life, so that people are informed, because the biggest thing that I think is the barrier to someone experiencing a good death and the family that's supporting them is information and knowledge. And so I really wanted to be that person to go out and say, listen, it can be very, very different. It does not have to be, yes, it's going to be sad and it may be sorrowful, but it doesn't have to be just that. It can be something different. So I became a community educator, but as time went on in hospice settings, community educator really is a marketer. And it's a needed thing, because we have to be able to bring our services as a hospice to the public, but you're really not marketing to the community, you're marketing more towards physicians, hospitals, assisted living facilities, anywhere where there may be people who would be facing an end-of-life decision. What I found in that role is that we could do some good work, but for the most part, now that hospice is covered, at least in the States, by Medicare and Medicaid, the idea that what am I trying to say? The idea that we were really educating people, I was really educating people in that position, was overstated. I was really marketing for basically people that were facing the end of life and trying to get them into our program. That's when I decided to start this company, Doing Death Differently and Teaching Transitions. And what it does is it capitalizes on my experience as a volunteer, and I created an online end-of-life training program for hospices. We're actually now in colleges and universities. We just got our first college over here in Pennsylvania, and we're talking with a few others right now so that we can begin to bring students the idea of end-of-life issues. Everyone in pretty much every one of us is either going to be a personal caregiver or we will be dying ourselves, where none of us are getting out of this gig alive. So there's much to know and there's much to learn, and there's a way to do that. So I created an online end-of-life training program, and it's a 30-hour program that hospices across the country use. I also have the Doing Death Differently site is for individuals who are interested in learning about how to be with the dying, how to speak and listen differently at the end of life, how to support a loved one. All of the kinds of things. We have one of the modules is taught by a 20-year hospice nurse, where we talk about the things that people are most fearful about. And this is what I found in the hospice side of things, that when people don't understand what the signs and symptoms of approaching death are, they can get very anxiety-ridden about, are they doing the right thing? What can they do? What should they expect? So that they can be prepared for what is inevitably happening. So we talk about signs and symptoms of impending death, universal precautions, that is for the caregiver. We've got lots of different media elements in the program, from full-length films to animations, music, meditations, everything that really would take a live training, created online, and still have it translate well for a very experiential program, so that people can actually do some of the exercises in the program. One is called a dialogue with death, where we're doing that. We talked about it earlier, dominant, non-dominant hand writing back and forth so that we can find out what death might have to teach you as a participant. Lots of different. What's that?
Well, I'm just very curious about the dialogue with death. Can you tell me a bit about that? It just seems like an interesting conversation, and I do the right hand, left hand writing exercise, and I'll just briefly share that if that's okay, and then you can tell me how you use it in your. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so right hand, left hand is what I use personally and share with my clients for when you're feeling stuck, or if there's something going on inside that's kind of keeping you from doing what you want to do. There's something, but you don't know what it is. It's often subconscious. So pen and paper, right hand, you ask the question to yourself, like, what's going on, or why am I stuck? You put the pen in your left hand, and what this does is it does something in the brain, and it accesses a different part of you, and then you wait for the answer to come. And you know, something will come, and then I change to the right hand because it's easier to write. And then when I first did this with myself, I was like, okay, why are you stuck? Left hand, I'm afraid. What are you afraid of? And left hand said, I'm afraid of effing up. And to me, this was huge because I don't swear, and this was, you know, swearing. And at that point, I knew that I was accessing something that was deeper than my normal thoughts allow. So my right hand says, could you be more specific? Could you please be more specific? And when you do this, the right hand is like the loving mother or the caregiver. That, you know, it's like you're talking to a afraid child, and then because it is a part of you that's you know, afraid of something that's keeping you down. So that's how I use the exercise. And now I, you know, only about 10 minutes of this little writing exercise, and I'm just like back in my game, either problem solved. I usually end it with, what do you do, or what do you need from me? What do you need right now? And it's usually a very specific thing. Yeah.
That is exactly it, and it's a wonderful exercise for so many things, and we use that in the in our training program for learning a little bit more about our own personal beliefs, fears, and ideas about death. So, in a on the dominant hand, we would say, is there a message, death, that you have for me? And in the left hand, then, or well, in my case, it would be left hand, non-dominant hand, would come the answer. And what I love about this exercise with the dominant, non-dominant hand is that when you're writing the answer with a non-dominant hand, it's not, it bypasses sort of the way that you would normally write with your dominant hand, which might be not thinking, which might be rather quickly, all of those kinds of things. So if there's a little bit more of a struggle with getting that information out, but when it comes out sort of more purely and more from a deeper place than just your conscious self. And it is beautiful, and it works for so many things, and that's one of the reasons why we incorporated it. I actually learned this when I was taking my training, and we've incorporated it into this program. And basically you're asking questions of death. Now, prior to this, there's a full meditation where we bring you, fairly deep in terms of a meditative state, not hypnosis or anything like that, to sort of go to a place of safety so that when you're examining these beliefs and these fears, that there's a context of safety. You're going to a place in this meditation that is kind of your happy place, your feel-good place, your place where you're most comfortable. So there's a nice setup for this by the time we begin to ask death these questions. And there's some very specific boundaries set up as to where death can come and where death can not come, where he's not welcome within this meditation setting we have here. And then we leave time for the participant to draw a picture of death, to ask these questions of death, and to find out if there's any unfinished business. It could be with a person, a place, or thing. Sort of like I would expect that you do in your coaching, Myste, because when there's unfinished business, many people feel like, at least I've seen in my work, if someone is dead, that somehow they're stuck forever in the relationship place where they were before they die.
Yeah.
And you're shaking your head, so...
Yeah, yeah, a lot of it is fear and guilt. Fear and guilt are big. Wow. Yeah, that's neat. Whenever we talk, Patty, I'm always so amazed because you end up saying things that it resonates so much with me or my work or something I've already done, and I think that's part of why we connected and got together. So that's really neat, and yeah, I haven't heard that deep dive into what you do, and yeah, hope we can continue this conversation after. Yeah.
Very, very exciting. And the opportunity for, initially it was developed just for hospices, and now it's available for colleges and individuals who want to be death doulas or are, let's say, a mental health professional, a grief coach, a counselor, or just somebody that has the call to do this work like we do. So it's been a joy to put it together, and of course there's always learning as you're doing the teaching, and it's stay tuned for what's next, because we'll always be adding more, I'm sure. But no, thanks for asking. And before we go, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I am so curious about the fact that while you live in the Arctic, if you, and you probably won't do it now, but when you turn your computer around, the Arctic Ocean is right outside your window. We've been dealing with, like 9 and 10 degree weather here in Pennsylvania, and I think that's cold. So I think you might be turning it around. I'm not sure. But in any case, I was just very curious about the traditions when it comes. There is the Arctic Ocean. Oh my gosh. Seriously. Now, is that boat ever going to, is it going to thaw out in the, oh, somebody, look at that. Did you just order up that ski mobile to go by?
That's funny. It's called a snow machine or a snowmobile. But yeah, no,
This is a pretty common access to the ice right behind my house, so it's really nice because I get to see the people come and go, and they're called outlockers. They outlock, so they go out on the land and they go hunting. When in May, everyone will be around camping. Me too. I'll be getting my snow machine. You might be able to see just the windshields of them there behind the house. They're very deep in snow. But I have a sled, and we'll be putting on the canvas tent and the little Coleman propane stove, or no, it's a white gas stove, and that keeps the tent warm. And off we go camping in May, and it's beautiful.
So all of this, Misty, here you are in the Arctic, and the folks that are in the Arctic who are indigenous are known as the Inuit, from what I understand. And I was just curious, when we're talking about death and death in different cultures, are there any traditions or ceremonies about death and dying there, and what are funerals and burials and that kind of thing? Can you share with us a little bit about that? It's just fascinating to me, different cultures.
Yeah, I also like to be a part of ceremonies in other cultures. You hear that the biggest thing that I've noticed is wailing. So when, not as in the whales in the ocean, but as in a deep outpouring of a sound from deep within, and when someone passes and they have a service at the local church, because Christianity was brought in here, and most people follow that religion. And so there's a ceremony, and just a pretty average Canadian funeral ceremony. But at the end of the ceremony, when the people come and see the body in the casket, there's this huge outpouring of wailing, especially from the women, but from the men too. And the sound is so deep and so resonating. It comes from a deep, deep place within. And I do a lot of work with sound healing and knowing the Inuit culture and how they celebrate, and more so in the past and a little bit carried on now, but they celebrate with the drum dancing. So there's drumming, and within this drumming there's this they do wailing within the drumming, and I think that's linked to their health. So when as far as mental, emotional, spiritual health, so when they're something going on in their lives, they dance and they have a drum and they sing and they wail, they let it out, all out to the drumming and the drum dancing. And my interpretation, and I haven't asked anyone about it. I did talk to my good friend about this, and she agreed. So, is that the wailing at funeral service is really a wonderful release.
Yeah.
So it's just, whatever is in you that has been hurt, whatever injustices you have had piling up since the last death and the last wailing, this is a healing opportunity to wail about the one that's lost, to wail about their ancestors, to wail about the people you've lost, to release the deep pain and hurt that you have. It's an acceptable social place where you can openly express feeling, and it's been well documented that when we openly express our deep feelings with others, it's almost like the healing is doubled, or it has an exponential effect. So that's my interpretation of it, and it's a very, the sound is a little bit haunting, but it's also a cathartic. I think it's a catharsis, a release. So, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds quite healthy, actually, and I know that might seem foreign to many people, although there is I'm sure there are, I don't know what they're called, but therapeutic, sort of giving a voice to the grief and to the hurt, to the wounds, and perhaps when they have a voice or they're expressed, as you say, they don't have the same kind of hold on us if we can do that. I know I practice a version of that in my car sometimes. I'm sure it looks really odd at red lights, but what the heck? I'm releasing and having a good one. So,
Nice. Yeah.
right, that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I'm just noticing that we're we're at about an hour. It's kind of surprising that we've talked for an hour, but before we go, I just want to touch on our audience. Thank you, everyone. We should have done this a half an hour ago. I want to really thank Arizona, though, for helping us backstage today. For some reason, I was, again, having trouble with the comment tracker, and it was just a silly little Google gremlin. I was doing everything right, so I'm thankful for me, and super thankful for Arizona for walking us through that. Thank you, Mel, and Mark, and Heidi for joining us, and thank you to all of our viewers who are ready to open the door and listen and start the discussions around death. And before we go, I just want to touch on our goals for the show on the Death Chicks. And basically, it's just what we say in our banner. We're starting a discussion. We're not making light of death, but we are making death lighter. We want to build a community. We want to build a place where it's safe for people to talk about this stuff. And often, I think many of us have questions around death and dying, grief and loss, and it's not something that we're always comfortable bringing up with those closest to us. And sometimes there's just a little bit too much fear there to bring it up maybe with your partner or your sister or your kids or your parents or your friends. And we want to create a forum where you can ask questions and share things and just put it on the table and get it out there, because that's part of the healing. That's going to help everyone get over the fear, and once we're over the fear, life is just better. Yeah, and I guess the other thing is that by bringing experts in this area in and people who are open to talking about it, we're hoping to create resources for our listeners to go to, and if they are feeling like they need something more, and at least they'll be a little bit more connected than they were about places to turn, people to go to. Yeah, and Patty, I think, yeah, do you have anything else to say about that? I know, I really like how there's some of the stories Patty tells about, just the comedic side of death, and I think that's an important part too, and that's an element we bring in. And I do want to touch on that for a minute. And maybe I should have said this at the beginning, but one thing is that when you're laughing, when I used to teach, if I had an important thing I was teaching, I would always start off with getting students laughing. Because what laughing does is, at the brain level, is it relaxes the brain. And when the brain is relaxed, relaxed, open, and not tense, worried, your own drama going on, that's when you're open to receiving new knowledge. So if we make a joke here, if we laugh about something, it's not being irreverent. It's the purpose, I see it, is to bring you to a place where you're relaxed, where you're able to take in the information and see things from a different light or a different perspective, or maybe in a way you didn't see it before. So that's what the laughing piece is about. It's about healing and health and just being open to newness, open to exploring the field of death.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there is so much funny stuff around death without taking away the sacred, reverent connection to death that is definitely there. And, that's part of what we want to do here, is that, in fact, we say that on our banner. You'll see over there it says we're not making light of death, but we're making death lighter. And we want to do that with some kind of hilarious moments. And as we say, we want to hit everything from heartbreaking to hilarious, from the sacred to the silly, because frankly, that's what we're all about, is that this whole wide range. And it mirrors, to me, the whole wide range of emotions. If we're just happy, or if we're just in this place about death, or sad, let's say, about death, or we're just in this very narrow range, it doesn't really explore all of the other emotions and the other pieces that we can bring to death. And I'm always, Misty and I are always on the verge of laughing about something. It could be about death, could be about something else, and it has the kind of effect that you were talking about, that it relaxes and it makes the exchange just so much richer, so much more robust, and so delicious. So, if you happen to tune in on one of our jokes about death, please don't take it as if we're not holding a sacred space, because that is really part of the sacred space. And there was a funny story when I was teaching a volunteer group in Atlanta at one point. There was a woman, we were talking about the different kinds of how we are present for someone who is dying. And this woman came to tell a story, and she shared that she had a pretty connected family, so that when her grandmother was dying, everybody was pretty comfortable about the fact that that the grandmother was going to be passing on. And because of that, they had maybe 8 or 10 members of the family who were gathered, and one by one, each of them were going in to say goodbye to Grandma. And when each of them went in, being very connected, as they are to the universe and universal things and energy and that kind of thing, they would go in one by one and they would say, Grandma, it's okay, you can go to the light. Next person would come in and say, Grandma. Now, if you don't recall the story, but just for a little backstory, she had been in a coma for about 2 weeks, and they knew that she was nearing the end based on the signs and symptoms that were happening as she was approaching death. Third person, fourth person, fifth person went in to say, Grandma, it's okay, you can go, we're going to be fine, just go to the light. And about the 8th person, Grandma sat bolt upright and said, I'll go when I'm damn good and ready to go. And they were like, oh my God. We don't want to push Grandma over the edge. We just want to let her know it was okay. Well, we heard that story and we just laughed and we thought, you know what? Oh my gosh, that is great. Grandma sat up, said, I'll go when I'm damn good and ready to go. That was the last word she said, and that was pretty much it. That's fun.
Wow.
And
so she was in a coma when everyone was going in to say goodbye. She was in a coma, and they were kind of giving her permission to leave. And well, I've heard that when people are in comas, they can still hear, and I've heard that the hearing is the last thing to go. So these hush whispers by the doctors, sometimes people don't think because they're in a coma, they can't hear them, but I've heard the hearing's the last to go. So she probably was just tired of hearing this, and just enough already.
Enough. When I'm ready. And what you say is very true. Hearing is the last to go. If you hear stories about people who have died and come back, you notice that from an auditory perspective, they knew and saw and heard everything that was going on. They've actually tested this with EKGs and EEGs to see the brain activity and to see heart activity when people were talking, which is why it's very important when you're talking about the person who's laying there, take that conversation outside, especially if it's about their condition, their state, or those kinds of things. Those are just some of the things that we talk about in the training, and that are just good basic bits of information that the general population who doesn't want to talk about death wouldn't know, and they can just really enrich somebody else's experiencing by having that one little bit of information and not talking over someone as if they're not there because they really are. So just something to share. But anyway, to wrap up here, Misty, we could talk for hours, we know that. Yes, it's not just, when we talk about making death later, it's not just about the comedic parts. It's about the connections that we can make, as we talked about before. It's about the possibilities that exist, back to present of possibility, the possibilities that exist when we look and share and be with another who is dying. So many opportunities for a kind of connection that might be as simple as there's nothing more to say because everything has been said, or maybe perhaps not always forgiveness or things that might need to be said. And don't even think that death shuts that right off, because we can still communicate afterwards, and many of those exercises we talked about before. So really what we're talking about is death is an opportunity. You use those words as well. Death is an opportunity. I think death is grace in many, many forms, because if we choose to frame it like that, we can see grace in action by the lessons it teaches us, by the gifts it offers us, and by the opportunities it gives us. And with that, Death Chicks is all about all of that.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks, Patty. It's interesting that you said grace, because the first website I had was called Guiding Grace, and I have a whole story about grace. But and the period of transitioning too. I would like on one show to tell the full story of my mom's passing and her transitioning, because there is that space in between where she wasn't. Well, the doctor said that physically she should be dead, and they had all her internal organs had shut down, but she was alive, and I was communicating with her. Like, I don't know. At the time, I probably wouldn't have said it like that, and it kind of feels strange for me to talk like this now. But anyhow, I had this aha moment when I realized that she knew what was going on, and I wasn't really surprised. I was like, okay, that's cool. Thanks, Mom. That helps me out a lot. And I was so good with it, because I knew she was in a good space, and she didn't have a very good life at the end. But I knew she was good, and I knew she knew I was good, and that acceptance really helped me have a wonderful after-death experience with my mom and the family, who can be challenging, but the zone I was in, that death zone, that kind of in-between space, it's a strange space. Heidi talked about it quite well. That facilitated things, and I better wrap it up. I think we should wrap it up, because I could just go on and on. But
let's revisit that. Let's revisit that on one of our other shows, because I think it's important, and it sounds like that was grace in action for you.
Yeah. And one thing I also want to let viewers know is that we've kind of planned this first series. I've called it Dipping into Death, so there'll be 9 shows, and then we're going to take a little break, and Patty and I are going to huddle up and just say, what do we want to do next? And there's so many different things we could cover in this area, and I guess we want to just kind of decide what direction we want to take, and we want to hear feedback from listeners too. So if you have questions, please send us your questions, and we're happy to answer them. Or if there's an area of death that you want to hear about, we have a lot of people that we're connected with, and a lot of people who we're looking forward to interviewing. So if we hear from viewers what you want, we can. If we don't have someone on our list who covers that, we'll for sure find them for you. So keep the communication up, start talking about it, and start exploring it on your own. Our hope and our challenge. Thanks.
It's going to be so great. Thank you so much. Myste, I will be talking to you on the other side, so I guess that's it, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for everybody who supported us in the HOA community and outside that. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Bye for now.